Well, hello there. Welcome to this episode about two little voices. What are we talking about here? We're talking about the voices that shut down at parties. We're talking about the voices that hide online. We're talking about the ones that disappear or freeze during an argument. Are you one of those? Do you know some of those? Do you have some of those in your family? So, we're going to be talking about what I'm going to call a polarity of voices. Last week's episode was about too much voices. Today we're going to be talking about too little voices. And there is, of course, a continuum all the way between the two. And many of us have got hybrid voices where we're sometimes too much, and then we shut down, we're sometimes too little, and maybe sometimes we're just perfect the way we are. So before we go any further, if you're watching this on YouTube, do click subscribe. And as always, I welcome a lot of commentary, and thank you for everyone who sends in emails, just really sharing their journey with their voice of being too much, too little, shutting down, shutting up, and then waking up. So let's begin. We'll start with some characteristics of too little voices. One, and this is really probably one of the primary ones, is too little voices hide. In some shape or form, there's some hiding or anxiety about speaking, and these voices often don't speak. So let's just say socially, they might find themselves at a party, really just receding into the background, or feeling sleepy, or feeling alienated. And so there's a feeling of unsafety when around groups of people. Now, this affects different people in different places. Some might feel okay socially, but then at work they're not confident. And some people are okay with groups of people in a work environment, but they aren't okay socially. So each person's got their own special little nuance in this. And from a neurophysiological point of view, you could say they've got a dysregulation in their ventral vagal nervous system, which governs social regulation. That's my sense of safety when I'm with you. When I walk into a room, do I feel this kind of tension and a trepidation and fear? Or do I feel like this out-breath? I'm with people, this is beautiful. Another place that too little voices hide is online, and this is especially noticeable. Now, one of the things you can tell very frequently is a very difficult to discern profile pic of that person, or very few posts, or very few things that are personal. So in other words, a lot of shared posts, but you'll never see a photograph, or very frequently, or photographs of views and scenery. And it's not to shame that voice, it's just to say these are some of the characteristics of hiding, because I don't feel safe being seen in the world. And sometimes this will include, and this is true for all voices actually, a self-judgment and a loathing of one's own face. In other words, I'm too lined here, I'm getting too old, my face is too fat, it's too skinny, it's too much this. And yeah, so, and there can be some real self-hurt in that, let's call it that. And we'll talk about some of the remedies to this. But a huge factor with too little voices is a sense that their voice is unreliable. In other words, sometimes it works and sometimes it really lets me down. And sometimes it shames me and embarrasses me. So when there's a lot of heat in the building, or charge, or when I have to stand up in front of a lot of people, or when I have to stand up for myself, my voice often becomes blocked and emotional, and I can't get the words out, and I can't find the words. Even the words will disappear and I'll speak gibberish, and then I'll feel very ashamed afterwards. And that sense of shame, let's say, is accompanied by perfectionism. It can be a big thing with too little voices. In other words, I don't want to speak because I can't get it out right. And it's a fear of making mistakes. And that perfectionism can go right back into, you could call it trauma history or developmental wounding, of if I'm not perfect, that I'm not acceptable, I'm not okay. And there can be anxiety in that perfectionism, like I always have to have everything perfectly composed, and my posts need to be perfect. I'm not allowed to just let myself be seen. Look, I'm another messy human just living my life. No, hello, I'm fine. So, and there are beautiful remedies for that too, and really meeting and getting to know the inner critic that has got kind of an iron rule over the self-expression. And beneath or within that inner critic, the anxiety and fear that occupy the body. And even beneath that, the wounded parts, call them wounded inner children, wounded parts that are just terribly afraid and believe that if they aren't perfect, that they'll be ridiculed or rejected, and just all the love in the world will just disappear. Because a child full of love will just play and be a fool. And us adults, being a fool is mortifyingly scary. Now here's a word that sometimes people don't recognize or won't resonate, but it's often in voices, and that's shame. So shame, you might not recognize the flush of shame in your body. I know exactly what it feels like. I sometimes used to describe myself as a shame baby. In other words, if that was a thing, other people get super anxious, I would have this kind of inner shame. And it's like this flush of a horribly sick feeling inside. But the way it manifests is in exactly a shutting down of voice or disappearing or hiding. And if you're not familiar with shame inside yourself, and yet you find yourself hiding, I would suggest really looking at the emotions and the feelings. It's very easy for us to project our shame outwards. In other words, what will happen is if you're posting online, or as you consider posting online, you, like me or like any other human, might play movies of a particular friend or certain friends or loved ones judging your post and telling you, oh, that's a bit crap, or is that really you, or just judging you. And so that's a way that we can externalize our shame. In other words, we must use an image of someone else to not have to face up to this is how we actually feel inside. It's not that friend who thinks that, it's me. So there are a lot of physical sensations that accompany this, physical feelings. And when one is doing somatic work, that's S-O-M-A-T-I-C, in other words, really learning to feel into what the body feels like as these emotions are happening, one can become incredibly in tune with the kind of the flash of feelings and sensations and emotions as they pour through the body. And of course, this is going on all the time, but a lot of us are very dissociated from our bodies. So physical feelings of a too little voice can really feel like a throttling or a closing of the voice. You might find your chest pounding or like a weight on your chest. A huge area for feeling it is also in the solar plexus, just below the ribs and down into the stomach. So you might feel roiling or numbness or fear clenching your solar plexus, activation of some kind. And you might find your hands shaking, all kinds of things going on. So, another characteristic with too little voices is that they often struggle with boundaries. So what this means is having a solid no, or even just being able to say, you know what, I don't like that. So someone says something to you and you just can't find it in yourself to say, you know what, no, sorry, stop right there. And one of the great telltale signs that one has boundary issues is if you often suffer from irritation with people and resentment. Resentment's a key indicator. When you're feeling resentful is often when you haven't said, no, please stop doing that, and they carry on doing something. But because you've never said no or said, I don't like it, your boundaries are getting transgressed all the time. But no one's got a hope of meeting your boundaries because you won't express them. And please understand, you have my sympathies, because I remember 5 years ago even saying, sometimes it feels like my boundaries, which should be solid, are like wet spaghetti. Like, where is that boundaries? And it's a real learning area for me. So, and we're going to talk about some of the effects of not having boundaries, but watch out for that trigger of irritation or resentment. I'm a bit irritated with this person. What that really means is that you're not expressing your boundaries, and at some level, you're probably quite angry. And so I'm going to say another characteristic within two little voices is that often anger is suppressed or sublimated. So what happens is it's not acceptable for me to erupt or let things out or be messy. It's and the anger is felt as this deep discomfort and irritation and anxiety below the chest, really, most of the time, sometimes in the chest, but usually it's suppressed down here. So often a too little voice won't even know that they're angry. They might feel a little bit irritated, but it's more like they've got a mental narrative going on about that person. I'm a bit irritated and da-da-da, why did they do that? And there's a lot of justification and arguing going on. So, but what's actually happening is downstairs in the lower parts of the building, there's actually some rage there that maybe wants to be met. Within a traumatology landscape, you might say, so the traumatology landscape of just describing the 4 F's of fight. So that's the person who fights, flee or flight, leaves the building, freeze, those that freeze, and fawn, those that are very nice even when they don't actually want to be. The two little voices often flees, so flees or flight is a fawn, and freezes. So from a fawn point of view, a two little voice will always be peacemaking and like, I'm fine, and we always be saying the nice thing because it's way too scary to say how you really feel. And the freeze response will often, as a two little voice, if there's conflict, will literally the whole body will freeze and nothing will come out. I definitely have had a freeze response in my body during my life, where if I was receiving anger, my whole body would go into a freeze. I didn't know that at the time. I just knew that nothing would come out, and I thought that that was maybe the right thing to do. And then a flee response will really be either withdrawing or even leaving the relationship because it can't express itself and it's so stuck. So you might have a hybrid between these, like a flight freeze response or a flight freeze and fawn response as all of your coping mechanisms when there's conflict. So this is just how it goes, but we can work on it. We'll talk about that more. So some of the effects, one of the hard things about having a too much or a too little voice or a hybrid voice like this is just to face that it has effects in the world. On the one level, to have a too little voice means that you hide, and often you hide your light. You don't show up in a big way in the world because you're too scared to really put it out there. See, often these voices have got incredible gifts and incredible sensitivity, but they're basically just hiding and hoping that the world will discover them, which just doesn't really happen. And so often it's an incredible waste of genius and a beautiful human who is playing small. And I want to say that withdrawing, which is often a part of this, withdrawing and not being seen and not expressing, can often have catastrophic effects in relationships, because if I'm unwilling to express my boundaries and say how I feel, it's impossible for me to feel safe in a relationship. Brené Brown speaks about this really clearly. It's actually impossible, or pretty much impossible, for us to have true compassion and true connection without boundaries. So in other words, what a too little voice, and most voices will do when relationships fail with other human beings, will blame the others. It's their fault, or it's his fault or her fault. And actually the too little voice's inability to stay in the conversation or have the boundary that is often a creator of dysregulation in the relationship too. And so often the too much voice will get the bad rap as the aggressor, and the too little voice will be withdrawing and moving into itself and feeling like the victim in the situation. And this is a hard thing to say, but I'm just going to say it outright. See how this lands for you. That actually a too little voice, the one that doesn't speak and that withdraws, can be a perpetrator too. It's not just the fighty voice that's the perpetrator. By withdrawing and not showing up, that's also its own kind of perpetrating and acting out in the relationship. And it's very easy for a too little voice to feel like the victim in the situation and not see its own blind spots. And of course, not speaking about stuff and not getting the boundaries makes sure, guarantees that stuff will stay stuck. And hurts will just rankle and fester and stay inside. And ultimately can destroy relationships. And this is not to shame, but it's just to ask us, those of us with two little voices, to show up and face our own role in this crazy story of life, and not just point fingers at others saying that you're the problem. And again, we're not making ourselves into a problem, but we're owning up also to our own dysfunction, our own dysregulation in our voice. I hope that made sense. So, and quite a curious thing about this that one might not look at with a two little voice is inauthenticity. From fawning, in other words, just being too damn nice, to just not saying anything and not speaking when you actually feel something. There's an element of, I'm going to say, lying to it, just not showing up authentically. And, you know, we are all in this together as humans, clumsily waddling around, trying our best to work this stuff out. So no one gets to be perfect in this, and no one has to feel bad about this. This is just a journey of us waking up and owning up. And on the one hand, we are glorious and full of light, and on the other, it's a short and extraordinarily complex and bizarre life that we're going to live, this short life. And it will be full of joy, but showing up for our weird shit is also part of it. And lying in inauthenticity might be part of a two little voices journey. And the crazy thing is with the two little voice is that it's really difficult for a two little voice to get their needs met because they're too afraid of expressing them. So let's get into expressing. We're going to talk remedies now, because this can all change and evolve, and we want to grow our voices, just like we don't want to stay stuck with our developmental wounding for life. So, remedies. I'm going to say vocal liberation work, and this is a summary for showing up for your voice. And vocal practice every day. It might start with humming. It might involve doing scales or mantra chanting and some singing. Is part one of it. Bringing energy to this space to liberate the stuckness, because the stuckness is not just at a mental or an energetic, at a wound level. It's in our neurophysiology of these underutilized vocal cords. So we need to bring energy, bring life to them, and learn to love them and have a vocal practice every day. If you're a two little voice and you want to improve this, showing up for vocal liberation exercises is just a great idea. So journaling is good, so that you write some of the stuff that's rolling around your head. Consider therapy or counseling or some kind of form of talking, but at a somatic talking. I'm going to say body-based trauma counseling or therapy to really begin to work with the material that would otherwise stay stuck in your head and never exit your lips. I do, however, believe that practices that break the mind-body barrier, if you like, and allow them to meet each other, like tapping and TRE, are really essential and really fantastic tools. I work with both for helping people liberate their voices, and both have beautiful effects on us. Learn boundaries is another one. That's something you can practice. So when you find yourself with resentment or irritation, or you know that you're not saying something, go and practice it. First, write what you would say, and then walk around your bedroom or in your car and practice. No, John, I don't want to fax that contract for you. You can do it. I'm busy. No, John, I can't fax that contract. I'm busy having coffee. No, John, I am too busy to answer my pager. I'm not going to make that beeping stop, sorry. Anyway, and so on. I got a little stuck with using like what felt like 90s things like pages and faxes. So learn and practice boundaries. It's an awesome thing to do, and as I said, it's almost impossible to feel safe in relationships unless you're willing to express your boundaries. So there are huge strengths as well in a two little voice. I know we've been hammering on some deep kind of weaknesses and some of the challenges of a two little voice, but two little voices are often very gentle, are often very kind. I'm going to say very empathic. So one of the things that a too little voice will often learn to do is really read other people and adjust to them. And it's one of the journeys of these empathic voices to learn to sit more deeply inside themselves and have boundaries so that they can feel what's going on without getting kind of taken downtown by it. But too little voices are often peacemakers and they feel safe to be around. They're usually not aggressive, but at the same time, they will be wanting to learn how to show up more authentically. But yeah, I'm just going to say safe and gentle would be the best way to describe it. And sometimes nurturers and sometimes highly creative. So, as with all of these things, we're all just working this out together. If you identified with this, let me know. If you've got a too little voice in your life, yeah, please share this video with them. As always, just share in the conversation. Let me know what landed, and I'll see you soon.